The backstep in Monster Hunter Wilds is a little less important compared to World and Rise. This is mainly because of, But even so, you can still dodge many attacks with the backstep, since the backstep has a very generous amount of iframes. At 60 FPS, the backstep has 40 frames of invincibility, which is about 2/3 of a second. The backstep even works with the evade window armor skill, adding 2 iframes per level of evade window for up to 50 iframes. It also works with evade extender to increase the distance traveled. So why would you consider backstepping an attack as opposed to perfect guarding it? Well, firstly, if there's one major weakness perfect guarding has, it's that it doesn't work very well against multi-hit attacks. An example of this is Gormagala's sweeping breath attack. So rather than trying to perfect guard here, it's more consistent and maybe even optimal to dodge these multi-hit attacks with a backstep instead. Second, perfect guarding and guarding in general also only works when facing the direction of the attack, for the most part. In particular, this is true for all monster roars. And while it is relatively easy to perfect guard roars, there may be instances where you are caught in a poor position as the monster starts to roar, and thus the roar is too difficult to perfect guard. So in this situation, it would be much easier to avoid the roar by backstepping through it. Third, the backstep can trigger the armor skill Adrenaline Rush. At level 5, Adrenaline Rush gives a whopping plus 30 attack for 30 seconds. Now unfortunately, you can't refresh the timer until the 30 seconds runs out, but plus 30 attack is still a large increase, so it's worth mentioning and at the very least could be a fun and interesting Sword and Shield playstyle. And lastly, in addition to its dodging capabilities, the backstep gives access to both Charge Slash and Perfect Rush for utility. In fact, the backstep is the only way you can perform Perfect Rush in this game. So let's talk about all the ways you can perform the backstep. I'll be using the PlayStation default controls when talking about inputs, so if you are playing with a different controller, then you'll have to do the translation yourself. The first way to backstep is by pressing circle while holding back on the left stick after almost any move. This is useful for when you need to dodge an attack while mid-combo, or for when you want to go into Perfect Rush immediately after closing distance with Advancing Slash or Sliding Swipe. The second way to backstep is by pressing circle while holding back on the left stick during a roll. Now backstepping from a roll is more awkward in this game compared to World or Rise, where in those two games you just need to press circle during the roll. Consequently, this also means that you can't do any stylish turnaround backsteps in this game compared to the previous two. Nevertheless, it still could come in handy for avoiding attacks, but it's not as good for repositioning like in World or Rise. However, Sliding Swipe does somewhat fill in that gap due to its repositioning capabilities. The third way to backstep is by pressing circle and back on a left stick while in focus mode. You can even press circle as you're walking backwards during focus mode to backstep. This is a very powerful way to backstep, because it allows you to just immediately backstep from neutral, or without any prior action. I like to call this the instant backstep, and it is why backstepping to dodge attacks can be so good. The fourth way to backstep is by pressing circle and back on a left stick while guarding. It may be the most difficult way to backstep, but it is certainly worth learning this method. Fortunately, it does seem to be a bit easier to perform in this game since it's more difficult to get an accidental turnaround guard slash. But if you are facing in an awkward direction relative to the camera, back on the left stick will also be an awkward controller angle. This is where the directional control options can come in handy if you are trying to make your backsteps more consistent. By default, the inputs on the left stick are relative to the direction the camera is facing, but back on the left stick always refers to the direction the character is facing. So in Type 1, if you are facing away from the camera, back on the left stick means down on the left stick. But if you're facing towards the camera, back on the left stick means up on the left stick. However, in Type 2, inputs on the left stick are not relative to the direction the character is facing, and thus back on the left stick will always be down on the left stick. So in particular, if you need to backstep at an awkward camera angle, then changing to Type 2 will always make your back inputs down. Now I personally don't like Type 2, but there are probably some players out there who use Type 2 to specifically make backsteps more consistent. So if you find Type 2 better for more consistent backsteps, then go for it. We're still not quite done with this method though, because you don't need to hold guard for very long in order to perform any action from guard, the backstep included. In fact, you can perform the backstep from guard so fast that it doesn't look like you guarded at all. This is another way to inset backstep in this game. Furthermore, because you can guard from sheath, this also allows you to instant backstep from sheath as well. And finally, you can backstep immediately after a perfect guard, or after a perfect guard step by pressing circle and back on the left stick. What I mean by perfect guard step is tapping or holding back or sideways on the left stick after a perfect guard, which makes you take a step in that direction. I'll be making a detailed guard and perfect guard video in the near future, so if you enjoyed this video so far and want to see more Sword and Shield content, subscribe to my channel, it helps me out a lot. Anyways, now that we know how to backstep, let's talk about all the different moves you can follow up with. First, if you don't press or hold anything after performing a backstep, you automatically do an advancing slash, and it can be angled slightly to the left or right with the left stick. If you continue to hold back on the left stick after a backstep, you'll do a rising slash in place. It's not too spectacular offensively as it's more for repositioning purposes, but you can backstep again after the rising slash, and this is what I like to call the double backstep. Unfortunately, there aren't many cases where double backstepping would be useful in this game, especially since you can just double perfect guard instead, but it's worth mentioning. If you continue to hold circle after the backstep, you'll begin charging up for a charge slash. You can actually hold a charge for a while, but it's not going to add any extra damage or anything compared to just releasing right after you begin glowing. The extra charge time is useful for timing the charge slash at the right moment, or for aiming with focus mode. You can't aim anywhere though, you are restricted to about 90 degrees to left and right, and there doesn't appear to be any focus mode magnetization. After landing charge slash, you'll automatically perform a scaling slash, which sends you up in the air. While in the air, you can use the left stick to drift in any direction, and can perform one of a few follow-ups. Jumping slash does little damage and is primarily for building towards a mount. It's okay if you just want to use this for the first mount, but beyond that, I can't recommend jumping slash. Falling bash is much better for dealing damage and will also contribute to KO if aimed at the head. If you want to jump and fall straight up and down with falling bash, you can briefly drift back as you're ascending before using falling bash, which may help with better positioning. Plunging thrust can also deal a lot of damage, but only if you can carve through a large vertical chunk of monster to maximize the number of damage ticks. This move also deals some mount damage, but not as much as jumping slash. Finally, you can do emitter vital stab, which is pretty situational, but it's useful if you need to hit a really hard to reach wound. Now with all this in mind, any charge slash combo deals very little DPS, so charge slash should absolutely not be spammed. Only use this move in highly specific situations, like Gore Magala Sweeping Breath Attack for example. Last but certainly not least, if you press triangle during a backstep, or press triangle while charging, you'll perform the Perfect Rush. Now Perfect Rush isn't the best DPS combo for the Sword and Shield, but it is still decently powerful, so you can use this for damage when a monster is downed, especially if you're using raw or status Sword and Shield. However, the main utility of Perfect Rush is dealing some stun damage to contribute to that first KO. The angle and distance you travel for Leaping Slash can be adjusted 6 ways. Leaving the left stick neutral is the normal distance you travel for Leaping Slash. Holding left or right will angle you to the left or right respectively. Holding forward makes you travel farther forward, and holding forward left or forward right makes you travel farther and angle to the left and right respectively. Additionally, just like with charge slash, you can use focus mode to aim even further to the left or right if need be. For Perfect Rush 1, 2, and 3, you must press the button at the right timing for maximum damage. If you are struggling with the timings, I suggest heading to the training area to figure out what's going wrong, and to get a better feel for the timings in general. If you manage to land Perfect Rush 3, you'll automatically perform a multi-hit version of Scaling Slash, and from there can follow up with the same 4 moves as with Charge Slash. I recommend almost always using Falling Bash here for that extra stun damage, though you could consider Plunging Thrust if you're fighting a big boy and or not aiming for the head, like Jin Dahad or Zoshia. Now instead of performing Perfect Rush 3 and a Scaling Slash, you could alternatively perform either Spinning Reaper or Charge Chop. However, both options are generally very poor and I do not recommend either of them. The last tip I have is to remember that you have a lot of aiming power with Focus Mode, especially during Perfect Rush since you aren't super busy with your inputs anyways. So it doesn't hurt to toggle Focus Mode during Perfect Rush for more precise aiming. There is one more thing I want to talk about. The Evasion Mantle. According to the description, this mantle triggers a special evasive maneuver and grants a temporary attack boost. Using a normal roll to dodge an attack allows you to go straight into Spinning Reaper or Charge Chop, which is pretty cool. But what about the backstep? Will we get a secret powerful combo that no one has ever talked about yet? Can this discovery make the Evasion Mantle actually compete with the Corrupted Mantle? Maybe I'm mistiming it? Yeah, Evasion Mantle does nothing to the backstep. It doesn't even grant a temporary attack boost. It doesn't even grant the backstep any sort of evasion bonus. That is all I have for this video. If there's anything you'd like to add, feel free to leave a comment down below. Like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you aren't already subscribed. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.